Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy Dennis, lead artist of Moz House and host of the Moz House podcast. Today, our guest artist is Moz House alumni artist Fadl Fakhouri, a Palestinian-American non-binary artist whose work explores themes of definition and positionality through dots, lines, and color. Using the body, images, and objects, Fadl creates poetic statements of determination that have been exhibited widely, including at Times Square, A.I.R in New York, and the Cincinnati Art Museum. Originally from San Francisco, Fadl holds a BA in molecular and cell biology from UC Berkeley and an MFA in visual arts from Columbia University. After an early career in science and healthcare, they took a bold step to fully pursue an artist career, leading to powerful works that explore their journey, identity, and cultural heritage. Fadl received a Homebody Fellowship, which supports queer, trans, and BIPOC artists from the San Francisco area, in addition to support from Moz House as a resident artist. Welcome, Fadl.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
So good to hear your voice. You were here in November 2024, and you're so active. You're doing a lot of reading during your time here, I remember. And, yeah, just had so much questions about your work. So just from your biography, I just wanted to ask, when I went to school, I went for computer science and then switched to art. I was really curious about your trajectory going from a BA in molecular and cell biology, and curious what led you to pursue the arts.
For me, I was always a creative. I remember I would go to the library in elementary school and just check out this same bird encyclopedia just so I could draw the birds in that book. I would always pick up whatever instrument or any sort of creative medium. A lot of the times I would drop it after a while and explore various mediums. I was always creative, but it was mostly about the risk of being an artist and pressure from family to be a doctor. They made a lot of sacrifices to immigrate from Palestine to the US and didn't want me to suffer any sort of instability and pick a career that is more financially stable. I graduated, was working in healthcare as I had always been doing, and I just had this epiphany where it was just like, oh, this is it. It's going to be this for the rest of my life. And I thought that was much more daunting and scary than trying and risking being an artist. And then I decided to apply for MFA programs, which I didn't need to do to be an artist, but I wanted to have a professionalized career and also be able to teach.
That's really incredible. So it comes a little bit from your family connection. Being at Moz House, it was your family space.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have your parents opened up to the work that you do, or just the idea of being an artist in general? Or
Yeah, actually they have, and it has probably only happened in the last year because they've seen that I have achieved some successes. When I tell them about my career in the arts, I always say I want to be a professor, and I think that idea is appealing to them. I think that they've definitely opened up and they've attended some of my exhibitions, and they told me that they had tuned into my talk at Moz House. I definitely feel more supported now, and I think the fact that I haven't quit the arts proves to them that I'm really invested in it. They might as well support me in the arts as much as they can.
That's wonderful. I think some of the work you were doing before Moz House focused on dots and lines, elation, poetry, drawing, a little bit of everything. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your line work. I'm looking at this piece, Highway Pass, No Pass 2021. It looks like it's maybe tape that goes along the floor, and then at the walls, things that if you drive over them, they're little bumps on the highway. So it's
They have highway reflectors. There's so many different names, but it's not as difficult as one would think to get those.
Can you talk a little bit about what the highway represents in your work in perhaps context to either visual language or identity? You also work with themes of displacement and resistance. I wonder how all these are represented in that one installation.
Yeah, so that work actually exists in two modes. One is as the installation with the highway components, and the other version has two monitors, each one playing a video performance. One is on the east side of the highway, and the other one is on the west side. The story behind this artwork actually consisted of me literally just, I was just like walking in Petaluma, my hometown in California, and I noticed one of these highway reflectors had come apart and was on the sidewalk, and I was analyzing it. And that was an interesting experience for me because how often are we in direct contact with these street markers? It would be dangerous to be on a highway and touch and look up close at these components. That's the personal anecdote where that started, but then I inject some history of my family's archive into the work. I like using more widely understood symbols to communicate my ideas, using the highway as a gateway to the audience. A lot of my own narrative is founded on being misunderstood as Palestinian growing up under the radar in a lot of ways, because during my entire life, I didn't really have the ability to talk to the general public about Palestine. I used this work to show my family's immigration from Palestine to the US. And yeah, the video performances basically detail the different experiences. Like one side, there's a lot of occupational violence. Then on the other side, there's this pressure to assimilate. And yeah, there's a lot of little details in this work too, where not all highways are painted yellow, some are painted white, because in this case, I wanted to choose two paths that are going in opposite directions. Other key details, like the east side has a dashed line, which means that my family was able to go to the west, but you can't go back because on the west side, it's a solid yellow line. And that's also about my disconnect from Palestine and the journey of trying to feel reconnected to the culture and the history there.
It just seems like between Native American history with colonization and what's been done with Palestine, there's so much overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So I also love working with ubiquitous materials to connection with the viewer. Also love working with archives. So what's your current subject matter or theme that you look out for most when you're delving into cultural memory or looking at books? Like what sticks out most to you?
So you mean mainly in terms of things that I'm keeping an eye out for, or just what grabs my attention? Yeah, it really depends on the space that I'm in and what's available. Let's say it's a perfect library or some sort of inventory where it has exactly what I want. The lack of certain topics is what I look for the most. This sort of absence of things that I want to address and get support from. I like to unify a lot of the oppression and make connections. That's why lines are inherent within my work, and you deconstruct it and you find little pieces in it. I just like things being in pieces and trying to connect them. Could be something as I don't know, as what's the word? Just like a daily sort of mundane topic, like about like fabrics or colors, or something as large as a specific history, like British colonial aerial surveillance of Iraq, for example, and just like connecting the simple and the less simple.
My own work, looking at Native history, there's so much conflict and sadness just talking about it. So I try to filter it through a lens of humor at times. But I wonder, in your career as an artist, has there been a time where perhaps you were a little bit too direct and you had a response that made the transition into simplified forms or ubiquitous objects as a form of storytelling? Or were you thinking about that in the beginning in terms of like the public always has to have this softening to get into the work?
I used to be much more, I don't even know exactly the way to say it, but trying to be a shock value in the work in a way. And now I'm more, I would say, soft spoken within my work, and I focus more on the poetics now. I feel like I've definitely developed my own library of knowledge, my own methods of communication. I shied away from talking about things that are always talked about, and there's such a history of these things being talked about. I used to use bigger words like oppression, racism, violence, segregation, colonialism, and now I focus more on the details of that and more specific stories, maybe my own family's archive of photos, or thinking about a story that my dad told me about his cousin or himself growing up in Palestine. I think now where I am with my own work is looking at my own story, since I'm writing this sort of speculative memoir and thinking about my own history. What can I create out of that history, and how do I perceive it, if that makes sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that. Speaking of memory and the poetics, I want to transition into your particular time at Ma's house. You were in residence for about 2 weeks. Maybe you could describe it better, but perhaps you were embodying or performing as Hassan Kanafani, a prominent Palestinian writer.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote about poetry, politics, and he was assassinated as a young age, tragically.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what initially drew you to his story and embodying Hassan. You dressed as him, you performed as him, you took self-portraits as him. What other impacts has he had on your life?
It's really funny because this was actually a project for me to get to know him more, because it started off with the fact that people would tell me, "Oh, you look like Hassan Kanafani." And it's all because I got a haircut over the summer. It buzzed my hair for the first time since high school, and it had just grown out to this length, and had my mustache too. And that's exactly what he looks like, even skin tone. Obviously, our proportions are a little bit off. Like, he's more lanky and I'm not. But I basically wanted to just get to know him more by getting to read more of his work, put myself in his shoes. I feel like I relate to his demeanor in a lot of ways. He's sassy and salty, very much a sad boy, and a little bit bitter too. But he also has the ability to love. I wanted to dive more into this, and the project's still not over. I'm still learning what more I can do with that and how deep I want to get into it. I think it's also an interesting balance between still staying true to creating my own work and then not relying too much on his work. It was just a chance to try to get to know him better and his work, since he's such a well-known figure. I wanted to draw connections between the present and the past, and how things have not really changed. The violence of Israel is still there, and a lot of the same discussions are still had, except they're just using different words, different tactics in some cases, but a lot of it generally remains the same.
Funny, you describing yourself earlier is a little bit on the softer and more, I guess, yeah, emotionally vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
during kind of Fani's bitterness,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in response to what he was going through on the day by day. So I
Mm.
was curious if you're not finished with this portion of exploration.
Mm.
In his life, he passed away at the age of 30. I'm curious, with your work with archives and your work of finding new voices, is part of your exploration going to be like, what if he lived on, or what would he comment
Mm.
in today's situations?
That's a really good idea. But I think more so getting deeper. I want to get deeper into his life rather than deeper into my life. So I think something like maybe writing about his family, or making up a story about a cousin that doesn't actually exist, maybe. Or I don't know. It was a question of, do I want to really learn his demeanor? Do I really want to learn his gestures? Or will I become too critical and too nervous about whether I'm mimicking him or copying him too much. It depends on what challenge I want to take. But for now, it's mainly about looking into his story to make a point. It's still not fully fleshed out and it's in the developing stages. But yeah, I think employing some humor might be interesting too.
As a photographer myself who does self-portraiture, I was really curious about, in your presentation, you shared archival photos in black and white of Kanafani and some of the images of you in the same exact pose. I was really curious, how did you come to wanting to do that process, and how does your self-portraiture differ from the originals?
Some of the ways that my own photos differ from his photos are the fact that I didn't want to first off, just the fact that I'm not actually him, right? And so I wanted to maintain a sort of a difference between me and him, and also just his time and my time, but also instill this sense of camaraderie and how I hope to leave an impact just like him. I'm not living in his time. I definitely don't have the same traumas or violence of displacement that he went through. He had a pretty tough life. I've been blessed in a lot of ways. I just wanted to show how, for example, there's some photos of him in his office space. And back then there weren't laptops, there weren't even Post-its. And in one of my photos, I'm sitting there with my MacBook, the free Gaza sticker on it, and a Post-it on the wall. All of the photos I took were in color too. Most of the photos that I was able to find of him are in black and white. Just showing how things are still similar but different. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the violence of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and it's just sad.
And speaking of how things are different but the same, you recently a performance series that you called Text to highlighted artists and poets, performers who centered on state borders, interpersonal boundaries, the body and linguistic borders in text and images. I was really curious about, how did this performance in New York City come about, and how it went. I apologize again for not attending and missing out.
Oh no, it's far. Yeah, actually, luckily there's going to be a second edition because it's a series. I really wanted to make a point of continuing this. So there'll be another one in February sometime at Brief Histories Gallery in Chinatown in New York.
I was just curious how the organizing came about.
It was definitely inspired by my own artistic practice, and I don't get to curate often enough. I wanted my curatorial practice to be an extension of my artistic practice because I view exhibition as this whole other medium. A lot of my work has to do with lines as a starting point. This line can be either a good, bad, or neutral thing, and a line can turn into a border or a needed interpersonal boundary. I wanted to bring together people whose work deals with various borders. The reason why I called it text to speech is because text seems like a very objective term. It's just, this is, just text. There's not much to that, but speech has different connotation associated with it. And so thinking about the point at which text becomes speech becomes this sort of movement, this action of protest. And yeah, that's the philosophy behind that. I just wanted to bring together people that I see as my colleagues and my comrades and have it be a traveling exhibition, or like a traveling performance and poetry series and exhibition as well.
That sounds incredible. I hope I can attend in February. I was curious with your themes of displacement and borders and the line work that you do as an artist. You could talk about your time at Moss House on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation, and is that compared to how you live day by day at home or the other residencies? Did you have any unique things that happened while you were here?
I think that it was a beautiful time and a real blessing and privilege to attend. I greatly appreciate you hosting me there. The ability to get away from the day to day. As artists, can be hard sometimes to take ourselves out of context, out of the mundane, and go into our own world, which sometimes isn't a physical space. Sometimes we don't have a studio to create work. Going to a place that I'm not familiar with shows me what I'm familiar with. Being in a different environment really lets me know who I am. Traveling in general, even though this was not necessarily traveling, being taken out of my own context really helps me focus more and get the work done.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the gift of time, and we're grateful for your presence as well in November. Aside from the text-to-speech series in February, more things that either you're working on personally, like new projects, or any public programs that we can look forward to?
Things like talks in development. But I think for now, especially in the fall, I like to take this time to go into my own zone as much as create work. And then I feel like spring and summer is a really good time for exhibiting what I've created. I think for now it's mainly about getting these projects like my memoir and maybe another film, because I have this one film called Freedom of Movement that I created that was originally a segment of a larger film. After remembering that I have all this other footage, I was thinking I should probably finish that film, but no promises, because I feel like I have to get more footage from place to place in Palestine, crossing various borders. I think it requires more footage, so I don't want to rush it. That's it for now. Just doing those works in text to speech. Yeah.
That's so awesome. So it sounds like you're very busy. I'm glad I'm interviewing you in the colder seasons where you're building up some ideas, working in the studio. I was curious what your day-to-day looks like as an artist. Are you in a studio that's dedicated to making, or what does that usually look like?
It's interesting because I told myself that after my MFA, I never want to pay for a studio. Unless it's no financial burden at all, because studios can be so expensive. I wanted to use that as a catalyst to get into more residencies, to pursue spaces where I can more easily create work. But it's been a really good challenge to not have a studio, because I wouldn't have made that film if I had a studio. I got the footage, I did the traveling, and then I just had to edit it. And obviously it did take a lot of focus to sit down and edit. But if I had a studio, I'd be focusing more on physical work. I think also I have a sewing machine that I got recently, and I used that to sew together this hybrid of a Palestine and American flag, and use that in a performance about the discomfort of being at this weird hyphen standpoint between Palestine and the US. But yeah, day to day in terms of my art life is doing a little bit of reading. I feel like I'm always applying to things, and also just living is a good way to get more research materials, I feel. Yeah. It's a more calm.
Your film on Palestine and crossing borders, actually going to Palestine, or do you use residency spaces as a suggestion of Palestine?
Oh, that one. Yeah, I actually did go to Palestine and get a lot of footage. It was also my first time. Very tricky feeling. And I like to address the tricky feeling because I had gone into so-called Israel, but I didn't go legally. So there's sneaking in. I went to places like Tel Aviv and Haifa, mostly to connect with Palestinian artists there. But also it was just like a weird sensation to go from Al Khalil, where my family is from, and cross into Tel Aviv. But yeah, the footage there it's from there, and a lot of it is things that I'm witnessing, but also a lot of it is me talking about my point of view. My first impression of Tel Aviv was the exact opposite of how I conceptualize it in my head. Like I see Tel Aviv as this sort of this like headquarters of violence, which it is. And but when you get there, and Tel Aviv means Spring Hill, it's this quaint little town, shocked by how cute it was. And then I understood this is how a lot of people there are unaware because it's such a bubble. I remember getting there and looking on my Google Maps and seeing, oh, how far am I from Gaza? And it's just 40 miles or something like that. And yeah, so it's a lot of experiences and a lot of pondering for sure, and a lot of discomfort, feeling guilty for even making that crossing. But I was curious, and yeah.
That's all. You're so incredible. So wait to see your completed film and get your memoir for the Moss House Library.
Yeah.
It was so many questions I have because what you're describing in your work are so many things that come up in mine in terms of it feels like you should belong everywhere. There shouldn't be borders, but it sounds like in your work it's like you're creating evidence of a crime that could be punished, and it's such a harmless crime, but it's so seriously taken. Sometimes that comes up in my work too, and I wonder if there was anything that we didn't cover or anything that you wanted to highlight or shout out before we end the conversation.
No, I think that seems like everything. The only thing is just free Palestine, free everyone else who's experiencing oppression. It's shameful how many different communities I could mention. Free them, free this, free that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And thanks for bringing me onto the podcast. I'm excited to listen to it and share it with my friends and everyone else who wants to listen.
All right. Thank you again, Fadl. If you'd like to support or follow Fadl's work, especially on Instagram, it's at Fadl Fakhouri. Thank you again, and hope to see you in New York sometime soon.